Mr. Moon, welcome to Dialogue. Recently we have seen this trilateral meeting between leaders from China, South Korea, Japan, and also we are seeing this 2+2 diplomatic dialogue at this vice-ministerial level between China and South Korea. How do you characterize the trilateral, bilateral relationship in this region at the current stage? Can we say we are back on track?
I would say yes, it is back on track because there has been a 4.5 years lapse. Therefore, it is very fortunate for us to resume the trilateral summit. And as Premier Li Chang emphasized, the Seoul trilateral meeting provides a very important momentum for strategic communication and the mutual trust building among three leaders. Therefore, in this sense, the trilateral summit made a very important contribution. And more than that, there was some concrete result, such as institutionalization of trilateral summit by regularly holding the summit meeting. And also, three leaders have agreed to come up with common strategies to deal with climate change, free trade, public health, and the promotion of exchange of human and social exchanges and contact. And all these things are very significant improvement. And another point is this, and also particularly with regard to South Korea and China, the meeting of two leaders produces some important result. As you pointed out, 2+2, and also both leaders have agreed to resume the dialogue on the second stage of China-ROK free trade agreement. And also another important development was both leaders have agreed to set up coordination committee to deal with supply chain security. Therefore, all these things underscore quite significant improvement in bilateral and trilateral relations.
You mentioned about free trade. So what is the prospect of a trilateral free trade? The three nations, of course, they are important business partners of each other, and all of them are part of this RCEP, Regional Comprehensive Economic Framework, ASEAN countries, the three plus, Australia and New Zealand. So free trade seems still, the preferred practice of countries in this region.
That's true. All China, Japan, South Korea have been the primary beneficiaries of free trading system. Okay? Therefore, it is really good for three countries to enhance trilateral FTAs. But it's somewhat complicated because now have two new developments. One is the creation and expansion of RCEP on the one hand, under the leadership of China. On the other hand, Japan has been leading the formation of a CPTPP. And therefore, the trilateral FTA negotiations have been somewhat delayed. Okay? In fact, it was first initiated in 2012 among trade ministers meeting of three countries. But for the past 12 years, the progress has been very, very dismal. Okay? But that is partly because of a new development in trade arrangement, such as RCEP, okay, and CPTPP. And therefore, I would say that this Japan, South Korea, and China trilateral FTA will be, in a sense, kind of subsumed within the framework of RCEP, if RCEP makes progress in depth and width.
You also mentioned about this supply chain, but at the same time, what's happening is, the U.S. is having this policy, obviously very tough policy. Sometimes people call it a containment policy to basically suppress the Chinese attack or supply chain. They would say that's a reliance on the Chinese side. But somehow South Korea, as an ally of the U.S., is kind of being caught in the middle. Is that the situation?
Precisely. And South Korea is caught between Beijing and Washington. And we are under pressure from the U.S. to decouple from the Chinese market. But the decoupling is impossible.
Even the U.S. itself is not able to do that.
Therefore, let's take an example of semiconductor. U.S. has been putting a lot of pressure on Seoul to decouple from Chinese market, but we couldn't do that. We are still providing, we are still supplying memory chips to China, particularly legacy chips to China, which is very important to Chinese economy. However, we're fundamentally restricted in supplying China with manufactured, the chip manufacturing equipment and technology, okay, and also chips below 12 nanometer, okay, which China needs. Therefore, on the one hand, we are complying with the American demand. On the other hand, within American constraints, we have been supplying China with much needed chips to China. We have two major manufacturers. One is Samsung Semiconductor, the other is SK Hynix. I would say that there is, almost 60% of their export go to China. Therefore, China is the largest, the buyer of their chips. Okay, but one way of hedging is to invest in the United States. That has been American strategy. Therefore, Samsung has made a huge investment in Taylor City, Texas, and SK Hynix made a huge investment in Georgia. Okay, I don't know to what extent that kind of investment in the U.S. Will make up for their losses in China market.
Right. At the same time, are we seeing like NATO expansion to Asia, or East Asia in particular?
But that seems too premature to talk about the NATO expansion into Asia. But NATO summit, when NATO summit was held in Madrid 2 years ago, at a time NATO leaders invited 4 countries from Asia Pacific: Japan, South Korea, Australia, New Zealand. Therefore, NATO plus 4. But original intention was to come up with assistance package for Ukraine. Therefore, NATO countries needed support from these Asia Pacific countries, 4 Asia Pacific countries, to come up with additional support for Ukraine. But afterwards, all leaders from 4 countries have been attending, NATO summit. Therefore, one obvious reason is to, garner support from those 4 countries for Ukraine. But there is a possibility that NATO countries may want their support in defending Europe too. Then maybe in return, all those countries may want European or NATO help in defending their position in Asia. That being the case, then there could be automatic expansion of NATO influence in Asia Pacific.
Especially after the NATO secretary, the current secretary, Jens Stoltenberg, talked very negatively about China. He blames China for the Ukraine situation, or for the largest conflicts in the European continent since World War II. Somehow China is being blamed, for Chinese side. It's kind of strange, for us. The rhetoric, of course, people are concerned with NATO expansion to Asia. That would create more tensions.
But NATO countries cannot handle European security. How the hell they can come all the way to Asia? Therefore, let NATO focus on North Atlantic.
As the name indicates.
Precisely.
Yes. Focus on the region or the Korean Peninsula, the relations, or even the tension currently somehow simmering between North Korea and South Korea. What's your take on that? How serious is it?
I would say quite serious. North Korean leader declared that South Korea is the principal enemy, and he also declared that we are in the state of war with South Korea, and South Korea is no longer our nation, our people. Okay? Therefore, North Korean hostility has become formalized, and also our government has been very tough on North Korea too. Okay? Our government regards North Korea as the main enemy.
From the very beginning, the tough position, right?
Precisely. Therefore, force to force, okay, tit for tat, that's going on. But problem is that in the past, we used to have a very effective communication channels, hotline between two leaders, hotline between our National Intelligence Service and its counterpart in North Korea, hotline between our Ministry of Unification and its counterpart in Panmunjom. And also there were 3 major military hotlines in the West Sea, demilitarized zone, and in sea. But now all those hotlines are suspended. Therefore, we have no ways of communicating with North Korea. That is one of primary concerns. And plus, North and South Korea both declared nullification of comprehensive military agreement. Therefore, now no buffer zones between the North and South.
It's getting more serious.
That's another big problem. And in old days, we could have utilized our NGOs who have been dealing with North Korea. But North Korea now completely cut up its ties with those NGOs. Therefore, we have no so-called private sector channel to communicate with North Korea. And most importantly, at the time of crisis, our government could appeal to Washington and Beijing to extend their diplomatic maneuver so that North Korea would come to the dialogue. Even those channels are now are not working either. Therefore, what really worries us is that kind of complete absence of communication channels and elimination of buffer zones and lack of facilitators in and out.
What do you think need to do, for both countries or for powers like China, like US, to help ease the situation or help, I don't know how hard it is to rebuild these communication channels?
But I think, as Chinese government used to argue that what is needed is mutual self-restraint, and that could involve suspension of military. That could involve suspension of nuclear missile testing in the north, and suspension of joint military exercise and training in the south. That could be a very meaningful step.
De-escalate the tension.
Therefore, you are absolutely right. In the past, our approach to North Korea has been kind of defensive deterrence and escalation management. But now is escalation deterrence, which is really very much anchored in the concept of offensive deterrence.
It's kind of a vicious circle.
That is really worrisome. Then comes the logic of force to force, tit for tat, a vicious circle.
Thank you, Mr. Moon. Thank you for speaking.
Thank you.